You know, when I proclaimed martial law, I didn't proclaim martial law alone. It is made to appear as if I just signed the decree and said, I impose martial law on each and every one of you. No. I asked the legislature to please pass a law proclaiming martial law because there was anarchy in the country.
Our speaker today is the President of the Philippines, Ferdinand Marcos. It has been 16 years since President Marcos came to the United States on an official visit, and 16 years since we first welcomed him to our podium at the National Press Club. When he appeared before us then, he had just been elected president of the former American colony, which became an independent nation in 1946. We knew Marcos was a war hero. He got so many medals in World War II that when the young Major Marcos met four-star General Omar Bradley, the general saluted him. We also knew he was a persuasive fellow. How else could he have managed to get his wife, who is known to be strong and bright, to marry him after they'd known each other for only 11 days? And we knew he was experienced in overcoming political adversity. After all, the first case Mr. Marcos ever won as a lawyer was when he successfully defended himself from prison against a charge of murdering a political opponent of his father. The president of the press club at that time, Win Booth, remarked at the great warmth of the greeting Mr. Marcos received in 1966 and said, and I quote, "Your very presence reminds us that you and your great people are the faithful allies of our country in time of trouble. And that, sir, is something the American people and the men and women assembled in this room are not about to forget," end quote. But much has happened in those 16 years. In the interim, Mr. Marcos declared martial law, or what he called constitutional authoritarianism, and did not lift it for 11 years. There have been charges of corruption, abuses of human rights, and political repression, and recently the Archbishop of Manila called openly for him to resign. But through it all, Mr. Marcos has remained president, and this week, President Reagan warmly welcomed him, stressing the many common ties between the two countries. The New York Times recently said, quote, "In a country that is deeply sensitive to style, Ferdinand Marcos has it, and it has allowed him to take the sweeping actions that in essence converted the nation from an ill-functioning, raucous but free democracy into his personal fief and seemingly permanent possession," end quote. President Marcos comes to us today as the head of a nation with a long friendship with the United States, a nation considered crucial to America's defense strategies in Asia. We are eager to hear what Mr. Marcos has to say. It's my pleasure to present to you Ferdinand Marcos, President of the Philippines.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Distinguished guests, my friends. It certainly is gratifying that in the course of my present visit to the United States, I should once again be accorded the opportunity to meet with the people who understand me or misunderstand me most. I'd like to thank all of you. I remember that our relationship, the relationship between the two countries can be opened up at one of 2 points by the historian or the curious investigator into world events. One, the military, which was Admiral or then Commodore Dewey, sinking the Spanish fleet under Montojo on May 1st, 1898 in Manila Bay, and with the help of the Filipino revolutionaries under General or President Emilio Aguinaldo, who then proclaimed the first Philippine Republic. Incidentally, President Emilio Aguinaldo was the grandfather of Prime Minister Cesar Virata, who is here. My grandfather only commanded the revolutionary forces. We have changed places since then. Either that point of entry is chosen or the more sedate commercial one 100 years back. 1796, the brig Astrea, sailing out of Salem, Massachusetts, towards Lisbon, and then to Manila, selling her wares there for 5 months, carrying that amateur and self-taught mathematician and navigator, Nathaniel Blow-Ditz, whom you must have heard, who later, in 1806, authored The Practical American Navigator, for he had discovered the simple way of determining longitude through the long voyage across the Pacific. The American government bought the rights after 2 editions, and it has become standard text for all those who study salesmanship from Kings Point to Annapolis. Either way, it has been dramatic and historic, and it was always to be so. There was always extreme on both sides, enmity, if not enmity, extreme friendship, a relationship of love, hate. And this is my fate and destiny. I thank you all for this privilege and this honor. It may be said that an official journal like mine ought always to visit with this press association, for, as someone once observed correctly, the American press is, of course, the 4th branch of government in this country. And then also it is well to remember that the so-called solicitude with which Americans regard developments in the Philippines is perhaps now more pronounced than in the devoted reportage by the American press on our country. This keen of the American interest of the American press notwithstanding, there is, I fear, some confusion in this country of what is happening in the Philippines today. It has been one of the shocks I encountered while preparing for my present journey, and also upon arrival here in Washington, to read in one of your outstanding papers a statement to the effect that the Philippines is still under military rule, which it is not, and that there is no civil government. Such misstatements, whether intended or otherwise, conveniently merge with more accurate reporting about the true situation in the country, resulting in much confusion and misimpressions about our country, require clarification. So perhaps I should begin by stating first a few basic facts about our country without too much embroidery. The Philippines is a republican state with a duly elected government at national and community level. We have a national constitution duly drafted by a constitutional convention elected and convened in 1970 and duly ratified by our people in 1973. Under that constitution, ours is a modified form of presidential government with a National Assembly constituted by assemblymen elected by regions in 1978 and a president directly elected by the people in 1981. Legislative power is vested in that National Assembly, while the executive power is vested in the president. And the party in power, the party that won the most number of members in this National Assembly, choose the leader of the legislature, and the leader is the Prime Minister, and he's no other than Prime Minister Cesar Virata. We have an independent judiciary which is under the full supervision of a Supreme Court. While it is claimed that human rights are not protected by the courts, or that civil rights are not duly enhanced by the Constitution, because there is no way of seeking, say, the remedy of a writ of habeas corpus. The truth of the matter is anyone can petition for a writ of habeas corpus in the Philippines. In fact, all those who have been apprehended as having brought in hundreds and hundreds of firearms bought from the PLO and other sources, and who have bragged openly in the television when they are caught that they were the leaders of these rebel groups, and who later changed their tone on the advice of their lawyers, went to the Supreme Court and were able to obtain an order from the Supreme Court for the Philippine government to bring the bodies of these people to before the Supreme Court, which we did. There is not a single man who has filed a petition for a writ of habeas corpus who has not been able to compel the government to bring the body of all those petitioners to the Supreme Court. In fact, the Supreme Court ordered an investigation on the allegations of torture, and the results were negative. The doctors testified that they examined all of these persons, all these petitioners, during the period of confinement, and they never complained about any mistreatment or torture. And some indiscreet remark indicated that this was merely said on the advice of the lawyer as a preparation for defense in the criminal trial. Now let's review the overall measures. All measures that have been issued by the President were issued at his instance alone? No. They are issued after a meeting of what is known as the party caucus. You who have studied constitutional law know that in a modified parliamentary or presidential form of government, the President actually doesn't make the decisions. He may lead the party, and therefore in the caucus he may exert influence in the caucus, but the caucus decides what is going to happen. What is the policy to be adopted? In fact, our Constitution institutionalizes this procedure and states that the program and policy of government shall be adopted by the Cabinet, submitted to the President for approval, but shall be responsible to the members of the National Assembly or the Batasang Pambansa, and for which the Prime Minister must stand. If he is rejected, then he must quit. He must resign, and a new Prime Minister must be appointed. Now, all cases are appealable to the Supreme Court, including cases of security against the state. We have a system of local government and administration throughout the country. In all, there are 73 provinces, 60 cities, 1,502 municipalities, 42,000 barangays, in each of which there are regular elections. Barangays are the villages. We just had elections this year. The election for president occurred in 1981. Under the Constitution, the people have a right of recall. They can recall anyone who has been elected by 1/5 of all the voters who voted in the last elections. A vote of 1/5 will suffice to call a new election for any given post. Our Constitution likewise provides for a Bill of Rights, which guarantees protection of the political and civil rights of all individuals, regardless of color or creed. Incidentally, that statement allegedly made by Cardinal Sin has been denied by Cardinal Sin. I was surprised that you haven't heard about it. This just goes to prove that there is some time lag when you move towards the West. Cardinal Sin, when he arrived in the Philippines, appeared before some of our friends and said, look, there is no quarrel between the church and state, and the church and state are separate. I have no intention of intervening in political affairs. I have not stated that the president should resign. That's his business. That's the business of the people. He was elected by the people, and I'm not about to say anything about this. That's why I'm surprised that here you make much of it. But I suppose that's part of news. It's good copy. Can you imagine asking the president to resign? That's, by constitutional mandate, social justice is a matter of national policy and a priority objective of government. And this is why one of the first reforms was land reform. You know, when I proclaimed martial law, I didn't proclaim martial law alone. It is made to appear as if I just signed the decree and said, I impose martial law on each and every one of you. No. I asked the legislature to please pass a law proclaiming martial law because there was anarchy in the country. Now, let me say this. The opposition was strong. And they were members of the Security Council, and somehow they had adopted a resolution which required that there be a unanimous vote for the armed forces to be able to move. And therefore, the armed forces was immobilized. At the same time, I asked the opposition party to come and join me in a coalition government. I offered one half of the cabinet. And of course, they laughed at me and said, why should we join you? We're going to take over the government. By the time you are through with the exercise, you're dead, politically and otherwise. So, and they refused to join me. I asked the advice of the judiciary. I asked the Supreme Court justices, the Court of Appeals justices, and the members of the private sector. And all of them told me there's only one man who can proclaim martial law, and that is the president. And you are it. You are the only one who can proclaim martial law. This is why I must carry this particular mark in our history. I could not have transferred it to the legislature. Why? Because the legislature did not have the power. What does the Constitution provide? The President shall be the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, and he may order the armed forces out to quell any disorder, riot, rebellion, invasion, insurrection, and in case of invasion, insurrection, rebellion, or imminent danger thereof, when the public safety requires it, he may suspend the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus or proclaim martial law throughout the Philippines or any part thereof. What does that provision provide? It provides that only the President can proclaim martial law. I repeat, that is why I had to assume responsibility. And I am not one for shirking duty. The people said there was necessity for proclaiming martial law. And the people said, you are the only official who can proclaim martial law. So I proclaimed martial law. And I sincerely believed that it was necessary to proclaim martial law to install order and stability because there was complete anarchy throughout the country at the time. Now, therefore, at that particular period, what was the status of our government? Our government was immobilized, impotent. The armed forces could not move out. The industry was not at all in any way moving. There was no income coming into government. Everybody was running away. They burned the U.S. Partly burned the U.S. Embassy, tried to burn it anyway. They tried to kidnap the American ambassador. American ambassador was Byroad, Ambassador Byroad. And they tried to kidnap our foreign minister, Romulo, whom you just saw today. And I told him, you better disappear because I will not ransom you. But whatever it is, they burned the Manila International Airport, they bombed the Supreme Court, they bombed the Constitutional Convention, they bombed the City Hall, they burned part of Malacanang Palace. They attempted to kidnap my children. They attempted to kill the president 8 times. There was, of course, an attempted assassination against the First Lady. You all know about that. And this required that I immediately act on it, and so I did. Now, we established land reform. We were fighting a group known as the Hukbalahap, Hukbong Nagpapalaya ng Bayan. It was socialist inclined. It was leftist. But they were friends of mine because we had fought in the Second World War together. And so I approached them and I said, look, I'm going to establish land reform. If you're fighting for land reform against the feudalistic agrarian system, then you must join me. And they did. I want to introduce to you the leader of that rebellion, who is now present and is a part of the government, Mr. Luis Taruk. He is a member of the National Assembly. The one reason why he ran to the hills, according to him, was he was elected as a member of the old legislature and he was not recognized as such. He and the others. Now I want to introduce to you another leader of the Free Farmers Federation, which is also composed of farmers who wanted reform, but who are fighting for reform, but who are now joining in the effort to establish political stability and economic prosperity throughout the country, and who was Dean of the College of Law of the University of Ateneo, but abandoned his deanship in order that he may join in the effort to attain the noble mission of this new society. I refer to National Assemblyman Jerry Montemayor, President of the Federation of Free Farmers of the Philippines. I would like to introduce also to you a young man who was very active against the government in 1972 and who paraded around the streets raising the flag of the Communist Party and organized the Kabataan Makabayan, which is the red organization of the youth. And this man is Nilo Tayag. Is he here? Anyway, he is somewhere around here. But they have all joined, all these activists, to prove to you that all these stories about our being oppressive against our enemies and our friends, they've all joined the government to help reform and drive out all the corrupt people in the government. We have an ombudsman. We are the only country with an ombudsman. You know what an ombudsman is. He is the officer who watches over the corrupt officials of government. And this man has charged more than 1,000 officers and employees and sent most of them to jail. Is Justice Pamaran here? He must be somewhere around. Where's Justice Pamaran? There he is. There's the ombudsman. And we have not deprived anybody of private property. On the contrary, while we are a free enterprise society, we have an egalitarian base. We recognize private property, encourage private initiative. Our Constitution explicitly recognizes the importance of developing the national economy and protecting the patrimony of the nation. In line with this, a National Economic and Development Authority has been created for the purpose of planning and coordinating economic development plans. I chair that Economic Development Commissioner. Now, I did not come all the way here to recite these basic facts to you, but it is best that we wrote this at once they form an important background of understanding the developments in my country. Relations between the United States and the Philippines now span, I'd say 84 years if you mark the Battle of Manila Bay, 184 years perhaps if you mark the brig Salem, from Salem, which when it returned to Salem brought back hides, indigo, lumber, pepper, and paid $24,000 in tariff duties. Many things don't change, not even tariff duties. Anyway, the trade between our countries is covered by a trade agreement. The military and security matters are covered by 3 agreements. Those agreements are, and I will now ask our friends in my staff to distribute these agreements to you, or as many as can receive them. These agreements are the Mutual Defense Pact, the Military Assistance Agreement, and the Military Facilities Agreement, which is due for review this coming year. President Reagan and I have agreed with the members of our cabinet that the review will start in April, probably we'll finish it by August. Through it all, our relationships develop in a way unique to nations so disparate in size and circumstances and so distant from each other. The direction which American colonization took in the Philippines in the political, economic, and military cultural spheres were such that for us, relations with the United States would remain crucial for a while. It is said that language is the greatest conveyor of culture. If that be so, if that wise man who said that is right, then your language has certainly conveyed to my country your culture. And this is why the relationship between our countries is something undefined. Our interests may have diverged in the period after our recovery of national independence in 1946, but this relationship has endured. And the question that is often asked is, does the Republic of the Philippines differ from the American Republic? Yes and no. It doesn't differ in the sense that it is democratic, but it differs in the sense that we have a prime minister, and in the sense that we try and make the legislature and the president or the executive work together. We cannot afford any stalemates. We cannot afford any delays. It is a modified presidential form of government, while yours is a complete and pure presidential form of government. Why did we change this? Because we cannot afford stalemates and deadlocks. Yours is a strong economy and a military power. Ours is a weak country. We cannot afford to delay and postpone decisions pending the debates between Congress and the President or the Prime Minister. The poorer third world countries cannot. And so, my friends, that is the situation. I am now going to ask also that my staff distribute to you the social and economic indicators of my country in showing to you the dynamism and the vitality of our economy. We have changed our economy such that we hope to be able to be self-sufficient. We were importing rice before. The last time we imported rice was in 1976, 77. We paid $500 million for that price. Today, we are exporting rice to our neighboring countries. And the per capita income was about $200. Now, it is more than $800 per capita income. The gross national income has increased 5 times. I need not go any further. I'll wait for the questions, and now I am ready for interrogation.
Thank you, Mr. President. Please give us details on your meeting with President Reagan. Did you seek any firm commitments? Did you get them?
Well, a firm commitment as to when we are going to review the basis, yes. A firm commitment that a mechanism be set for the study of our economic problems, yes. Because, as you know, the reason we have a deficit in our balance of payments is the commodity prices went down because of your domestic deflationary policies, your interest rates. But all of this can be worked out, and so it has been agreed Secretary Reagan of the Treasury is going to meet with our foreign minister, who is also prime minister, regularly. The next meeting is next November, I think. So we have worked that out. The national security matters will be worked out by the defense minister. The two defense ministers are also meeting in November. Those are the specific ones. We have also entered into a tax agreement and air agreement. This afternoon, tomorrow, there will be some kind of agricultural agreement. As you know, we have one of the most modern and biggest concentration of agricultural and natural scientists in Asia. This is in Los Baños, the University of the Philippines. And we have biogenetics, we have plant engineering, we have, name it. You remember that the International Rice and Research Institute is based there, and that it was the one that produced the new type of rice which produced the rice green revolution. And we help your scientists produce the corn that can fight mildew. When your scientists could not produce it, we did. That center is going to be developed. We are also hoping to be able to exchange technology on non-conventional energy and other matters.
It has been reported that your government will seek $2 billion in rent from the U.S. for the Philippine bases. Is this an accurate report?
No, it is not. We have never talked about figures.
Louder and clearer. We can understand the question.
The question was, is it correct that we have demanded $2 billion in the rent? The answer is no. We haven't quoted any figure. What we have asked is this. We want a study. What is it that is necessary in order that we can perform our job? You and I know that if the Philippines is attacked, the United States is not necessarily bound to immediately react, because the provision of the Mutual Defense Pact is that you will immediately take steps as is necessary to meet the contingency in accordance with your constitutional processes. What does that mean? That means that you go to the Senate and the House of Representatives. What does that mean? That means delay while we are dying there.
Most of our allies in Europe, concerned about resisting communism, give the U.S. free bases and even share the cost. Why shouldn't we expect the same kind of cooperation from the Philippines instead of demands for more rent?
Well, for one thing, you haven't exactly paid for what we lost in the last war. If we must make an accounting, 75% of our cities were devastated in the last war. We lost 1 million men. Shall I quote you the statements of Roosevelt and MacArthur that every Carabao will be paid for? Shall I tell you that the veterans who were inducted into the USAF, the United States Armed Forces of the Philippines, of the Far East, your armed forces, were paid only 1/2 the salary of your soldiers? Shall I tell you that we almost turned communists because you refused to recognize us? Shall I tell you that I had a difficult time stopping my guerrillas, 25,000 of them from joining the communists, because precisely you sort of forgot that we had done the fighting for you, you know, and we were parts of your armed forces. But in fairness to the American Congress, when we came here and we called attention to the fact that we had been abandoned and forgotten, they themselves, in outrage, immediately passed a law recognizing the services of the Filipino and reinstating them as parts of the United States Armed Forces in the Far East. including back pay and benefits. That, Madam President, is the answer, in addition to the fact that those people that you are talking about have been making money at the expense of the United States for quite a long time, while we have not.
After the attack on Pearl Harbor, U.S. bases in the Philippines could not be defended. Why should we expect that in another war these bases would be more reliable?
That's one of the questions that I wanted to find out. If you're going to run out on us anyway, you better let us know now.
Is it true President Reagan has not raised with you any concern about repression and human rights?
Well, he sort of spoke of the fact that we have all this constitutional provision. But we did speak of the fact that we must maintain and enhance human rights in general. But this fault finding that we found in some of these reports before isn't there. There is this open-mindedness and fairness which we expected of America and the Americans. The Americans that I know, the Americans who fought beside me, the Americans who bled with me in many a battlefield, was a fair man. He was a just man. He was a courageous man. He was a man who saw right and did right. And it is not fair to accuse the Philippines of any violation of human rights when there has been no violation. Though if there has been any violation, we punish those who have violated. And I now ask that this particular writing of one of the most celebrated figures, who claims to have, at the beginning of the campaign against my government, claims to have been maltreated by some of the military men, now reports exactly what happened. I ask that my staff distribute the letter of Herrera, Trinidad Herrera.
You have indicated that the allegations about political repression and human rights are overblown. How then do you explain the findings of the international independent group Amnesty International, which documented cases of torture, disappearances, and illegal detention?
Well, I'll tell you that the Amnesty International has never come to the Philippines. That's why all they talk about is something that they obtained hearsay. Let's give one specific example. Father Abedicio, a famous case. Father Abedicio is supposed to have disappeared. He is a member of the clergy in the Philippines. He's a Filipino. He disappeared and we couldn't locate him. Not even my best intelligence officers could locate him. And what did we discover after 6 months? We discovered he had run away with somebody who claimed to be a nun, and he was in Germany. How do you like that? And we got blamed for it. We got blamed for it. That's it. That's how the Amnesty International has been reporting all this thing.
This questioner says, I have been in Manila and talked with both Filipino and U.S. businessmen. They say the Philippines are the most corrupt nation in the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, and that your wife's nickname is Miss 10%. Will you comment?
They must mistake us for another nation. He must have been living in the bar. Because I can tell you, there is this man, Justice Pamaran, whom I just introduced to you. He is the ombudsman. You who know what an ombudsman is, knows exactly what he can do. He doesn't wait for evidence. Any rumor whatsoever, and he investigates it. You talk about my wife. Not that I would like to defend her. She can defend herself any time. She's quite capable. But perhaps that statement was said of another First Lady, not my wife. Certainly not my wife. Perhaps I can tell you that the property of the Marcoses has been brought into a blind trust. And not a 2020 blind trust either. It's a real blind trust. And we don't know exactly how that blind trust operates the property. The only property that we have control of are two or three houses, one in the province of Ilocos Norte, no, two in the province of Leyte, and one in Manila, 5. Then the schooling for the children, up to possibly a doctorate. Beyond that, all income goes into the Marcos Foundation, which is the foundation that embraces all property. Do you think that if there was any corruption by the Marcos family, that we can maintain the present prestige and leadership of the Marcoses in the Philippines? What do you think the Filipinos are? They are a very literate people. Literacy in the Philippines has increased up to 90% nationwide, and in Manila it is 100% literacy. And if there was any indication whatsoever of any of these corruption that you talk about, and whoever said that sounds like he has been in the wrong company. Probably the guys that he was working with may have been engaged in corruption. I'd like to know who they are. Then we'll go after them. But I can assure you, if any public official engages in corruption, he will land in jail. That is definite.
What do you say to critics who say your health is poor and you won't be around very long, but your wife may be?
Anybody want to try me in the ring? Yeah. Ridiculous. I refuse to answer questions like that.
Two related questions. You are indeed a family man. Your wife, your daughter, your brothers are all government officials. Do you think the next president of your country will be a Marcos, and would you like for your wife to succeed you as president?
No. The problem here, of course, is that one, you do not understand Philippine politics. You see, first of all, my brother, did you say my brother was governor?
Government officials.
My brother volunteered his services for Medicare. Did you want him to withdraw his voluntary services as a medical officer? He is serving our country practically free. He abandoned a very profitable medical career in order to serve what we have as Medicare, which is your Medicaid, no? Yes. He is not a government official by any means. This is a voluntary organization. My wife was elected. He was elected because the candidates wanted to include him, to include her. They wanted somebody to carry them. Minister Romulo will tell you that without the support of the governor, who happens to be well liked by the people of Manila, they probably wouldn't have won in the last elections. It's just a matter of helping out in the political campaign. My daughter is the voluntary head of a group of village leaders. That is not a political organization. That's not a government organization. This is an association of young kids who are organized in order that they can help each other. Kabataan Barangay. And I am surprised that you hold it against these young kids, that they get together so they can play football, they can encourage sports, they can encourage people, the young kids from going into drugs. Don't you think that you should also organize something here in the United States and get somebody to stop the young kids from going into drugs and instead go into sports? Well, that's what they're doing. Now, with respect to the other officials, the question, of course, doesn't specify. Let me put it this way. As I told you, our government is a caucus government, consensus. When the consensus of the party demanded that I appoint the First Lady as a member of the Executive Committee, I had an agreement with them, and that is that she would not become President or Prime Minister. At the beginning, even Prime Minister Cesar Berata was for the First Lady becoming Prime Minister. But the First Lady and I stood our ground, and we nominated the Prime Minister Berata instead. Now, is that the action of anybody who is preparing to take over as a dynasty? Now, my other daughter, well, she is in Pennsylvania. She's studying voice culture, and she is in anthropology. I don't see what connection that has with politics.
Mr. President, your opponents say this trip is costing between $5 million and $20 million. What is the budget for your trip?
It's ridiculous. My cabinet is spending only a very minuscule part of that. If there are any people who have joined this group, they are on their own. I'm sorry to say. They're on their own.
Do you believe the United States now has a consistent, understandable policy toward the Philippines and East Asia?
Shouldn't you ask that of the United States leaders, not me? But as far as I'm concerned, yes, insofar as we can understand. What I see is a resurgent American nation under a new leadership, trying its very best, earnestly trying to arrest decline and slide in prestige and in policy, in domestic and foreign policy. That is what we see from the outside. There is an earnest effort to prevent drift and confusion. Now, we would like to encourage that because among the small nations, there's no possibility of any progress so long as there is instability throughout the world. And so, as I said last night, what I see now, 16 years after my last visit, actually my last visit was when I came to participate in the memorial services of President Eisenhower in 1969. Not 1966, 1969. And, but what I see here is while in the past America was in the dark, and there were doubts and misgivings. There were fears that you were tiring, you were weary, you doubted your own strength, you didn't know where you were going. But now there is hope, and the phenomenon, what we see is an America emerging out of the shadows. It's still partly in the shadows, but it's trying to emerge. And certainly under the leadership of President Reagan, it's trying to organize an integrated, understandable foreign policy. And that's what we see.
There is widespread malnutrition in the Philippines, and only 1/3 of your labor force has regular employment. Given this, how do you justify the prosperity in which you, your family, and friends live?
You must like us, the way you ask those questions. Anyway, I don't know where you get your figures, but the unemployment figure in the Philippines is 4%. I don't know what's yours. I do know what's yours, but have you heard of the KKK, not the Ku Klux Klan, but we have a program which harnesses the energies of those who are half employed, like those who are in the farms. You see, those who wait for the coconuts to fall or who plant rice are partly employed. And so we allow them to engage in what we call small, medium-scale industries, contract work. Where, in what country do you see, say, a boot block? A boot block. Go to a rural bank and say, look, I used to borrow money from this usurious lender here. I borrow 5 pesos in the morning, I have to pay him 6 pesos in the afternoon. Can't you lend me 50 pesos now and I will repay you later on? I have no collateral, I am unknown, I live in the streets. And in what country will you see the rural bank lend this boot block money after looking at his shoeshine stand and gathering all the other shoeshine boys and putting them to work and getting them to repay this indebtedness, not in a week, but perhaps even in a day? Or fishermen who live a hand-to-mouth existence. Even here, in your prosperous United States, can a poor fisherman go to a bank and borrow money on his name, on his signature? He cannot. But here in the Philippines, he can. A poor fisherman can go to the bank and say, look, I live in so-and-so, and the chairman of my village can certify that I am a poor fisherman. And I would like to organize a group. Can you lend us 5,000 so I can buy a motor, I can buy a net, I can buy a small boat, and we can improve our earnings. And under our laws, we have set aside funds which then are lent out. And we have been able to lend out about 1,200,000,000 pesos under this scheme, and they have been repaid. They have been repaid, and that's the worst part about it, isn't it? Many people don't believe it, but they have been repaid. And so we have a situation where the work ethic has been encouraged. We tell everybody, you don't plant rice, you don't eat rice. You don't work, you don't get anything. But you work. We'll give you the wherewithal. We'll give you the funds. We'll teach you how to work if necessary. And we'll see to it that we will sell your products. That's what's happening in the countryside. Not all this talk about corruption and this ridiculous statements about people in government enriching themselves. When you have activists like Luis Tarok and Jerry Montemayor and Nilo Tayag and these men who were ready to kill the president, but who now says that the reforms that are being instituted are for the good and welfare of the country, you don't engage in any of this foolishness that you talk about. No, everybody is sincere and earnest about making our democracy work. And I can tell you that whoever has told you about these unwholesome observations about the Philippines, better come back to the Philippines. I'll pay for your trip so you can see what's actually happening.
Thank you, Mr. President. Before I ask our final question, I want to present you with a certificate of appreciation for appearing once again at the National Press Club and with an updated version of the National Press Club necktie.
Thank you.
And now our last question. Is it really true, as your biography states, that you were born in a thunderstorm?
How should I know? But my mother says so, yes. My mother says so, and I guess if you can't believe your mother, whom will you believe, huh?
Thank you very much.